Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this journey as I try to hear about everybody's story out there. This is your first time joining. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I think you'll enjoy what we have to offer here. This is episode 19. We have 18 fantastic episodes that are already out there on various podcast platforms where you can learn about anything from Disney to professional wrestling to immigrating to the United States to family to training to be a cage fighter. Whatever you want to learn about, we've got it. If you do want to learn about more things, or if you want to be a guest one day, please reach out to us on our Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. DMs are open. So just shoot me a comment there and I'll see what we can set up. Or if you have a comment about the show, you liked it, you didn't like it, whatever it is, feel free to reach out. We are also on YouTube at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can find me out at jeffseltzer.com. Lots of really cool stuff there. Additionally, if you want to sponsor the show, if you want to send me something related to the show or not related to the show, you can feel free to email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. Once again, we are available on pretty much all podcast platforms. If you found the show, you probably know that. If not, tell your friends. We are video on both Spotify and YouTube. We are available on Apple, on iHeartRadio, on Amazon, and Pandora, and basically everywhere else. If there's a podcast platform that we're not on that you'd like to see us on, please shoot me a note, and I will work to get it up there. Last week on episode 18, we talked about running and mental health. I got a lot of great feedback on it, as many people can relate. Lots of great stories. Lots of people shot notes to me saying how it really resonated with them in the fact that obviously there's the running piece that people found running useful for various things, physical, mental, things like that. Additionally, from a mental health perspective, lots of great tidbits in terms of how people, just journey through life, right? Like life is tough. We all go through different things. Everybody has a different way of getting through different mechanisms. So lots of really, really interesting things that people do to get through it. One thing I didn't mention is, once again, I don't talk about the company I work for. If you want to find out who I work for, go on LinkedIn. You can look me up. It's pretty easy. One of the things that I do really, really enjoy about my job is one of our core values is something called keeping it human, right? So the general concept is this, and this is a mentality that I have in personal life as well, is you don't know what other people are going through, right? Not everybody shares their experiences. Not everybody shares what's happening in life. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they have a friend or a family member who's sick, whatever it is. So if they don't necessarily come to work, in their best self, if they're not performing as they usually do, give them some grace, give them some space, and just recognize the fact that, we are all human. Nobody's perfect. We're all going through a different journey, and, offer help. If they don't want help, if they want some space, give them that. And eventually, if they are, a good person or a good human being or a good worker, whatever it is, eventually, hopefully it'll come back to where they once were. But either way, we're all going through and battling different demons that nobody else is even necessarily aware of. So just be mindful of that. Something that, at work, I definitely live by, and personally, same thing as well with my friends, my family. I try to give them grace and work through it. Additionally, in last week's episode, I talked about going to Philadelphia with my family. On the way to Philly, we visited TCNJ, so the College of New Jersey, as well as Drexel University in Philadelphia. Again, I have a daughter who's a junior in high school. We are in the early stages of talking about college. Super, super interesting, as college has changed a little bit since I was there 30 years ago. Everybody has a computer in the room. Nobody has a landline phone. Lots of things have changed. With that said, with things that are changing in college, I did want to introduce my guest for this week, Geri Perkal. Geri, how are you doing today?
I am great.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. For those of you that aren't aware, Geri is a college advisor. Long story short, how this kind of came together was last week while I was on the tour of Drexel University. I was messaging with a buddy of mine, Marcus, who I've shouted out multiple times in the show. He said, "Hey, I think I have the perfect guest for you since you're currently on a college tour." I was like, "Marcus, I don't think you have any idea about how college works these days." He goes, "No, not me. My mom. My mom is the perfect person to talk about. She's an expert. She helps out lots of people in terms of finding the right opportunities and situations for college. You should definitely reach out to her." So a couple of messages later, and Marcus set up a guest for me for this week. So once again, shout out to Marcus Brandon, or I guess now Marcus Perkal, as we can call him. And again, we're talking to his mom. So Geri, again, it's great to meet you. And again, thanks for the introduction. Your son is awesome, by the way.
Thank you very much. And I related to what you were just saying as far as everybody's dealing with different things. And when I look at this college piece of adolescents' lives, it can sometimes be stress inducing. And that's something that I pride myself on trying to reduce. So,
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for sharing, and I appreciate you coming on the show this week. So, outside of having, an amazing son, do you want to tell us anything else about yourself, personally or professionally or whatever, before we get into your story?
sure. So, I am a certified educational planner, and I specifically specialize in college admissions. I guide students and families through the process of finding a college where they can truly thrive. And my approach helps students explore and research key college characteristics, whether it's size, setting, location, majors, but ultimately ensuring that they find a fit that's aligned with their interests, aspirations, and their personalities. So that's a little bit about my, my my gig, I should
Awesome.
say.
Well, no. So first of all, I appreciate your sharing. Thank you so much. In hindsight, so taking a step back, my personal story. So I am 47 years old. I graduated Rutgers University, Rutgers College back in 1999. Grew up in Edison, New Jersey, which was like two towns over. So by default, I just ended up and landed at Rutgers. Um, Looking back and looking at my experience at Rutgers, Rutgers was definitely not the right school for me. Every school obviously has a different type of mentality, a different setup. For me, being 17, 18 years old, going, to a college or university where you're, in classes of like 500 people, right? And then I'm taking buses that go across multiple campuses. For me, I didn't have the maturity for it. Wasn't the right setup. Definitely could have used, I guess, other perspectives, I guess, or points of advice in terms of where to go. Because again, what you just said there resonated high with me in the fact that you help to kind of find the right school for kids or for students. For me, it was kind of a case of this was pre-internet, pre-whatever. I applied to like three or four local schools and like two out-of-state schools, and just by default, I kind of landed in one of the local schools. If the amount of information that's available today was available back then, or if there was like advising back then like there is today, I probably would have landed somewhere else. With that said, 30 years later, I'm happy with life, and I kind of did what I did. It was a little, touch and go in terms of me, doing well in school and graduating from college. But with that said, I mean, you obviously want to set up every student in high school with the situation will have the best chance for success, right?
100%. I think your experience being in your late 40s is probably very similar to most of your peers. I go back to when I went through this process. I applied to 4 colleges. I certainly didn't write an essay. I think maybe I wrote a paragraph, possibly. And the whole process has changed. And what I tell families today is even if they've been through the process a few years ago with another sibling, it will continually be changing. Every year, this process changes.
Absolutely. I mean, just right off the bat, the application process, right? Like I remember sitting in my parents' house on either a typewriter or word processor, typing up every application separately, right? Versus now, and keep me honest, you have more experience than I do. It's more of like an online setup where you can fill out information and you could submit to multiple schools at once because it's like through one portal. Is that correct?
So there is an application. There are a few different applications, but there is one called the Common App, which goes to vast majority of domestic colleges. And so, yes, there is a part of the application you complete once it goes to all the schools. However, every school then does have their own supplement. Some are more detailed than others. Some don't require additional writing. Others could have 6, 7 additional writing prompts. So but it has changed. It is relatively easy to complete an application, with the hardest part being the essays. So, whether it's the main personal statement or the college's individual essays, But completing the essay, you don't have to type, you don't need to self-correct, you don't need to use those little whiteout, whatever maybe you did.
I did.
Much easier now.
I'm sure. I mean, it sounds like, again, obviously, I would look at it back and say it's probably easier now. It's probably just different, right? Because obviously, as things evolve and as things change, things, obviously, some things are simpler, but some things get a little more complicated, I would imagine.
I think things, unfortunately, have gotten more complicated. And I think that the anxiety, back to how you started this episode,
Yes.
unfortunately, I think the anxiety and the stress that accompanies this for adolescents, like we just need to bring it down. It shouldn't be that way. This is an exciting time. They're out exploring.
Of course.
And that's something that we really encourage, my firm, which I'm co-founder of, but we really encourage students do their research, get out, feel these schools, and enjoy the process. And don't listen to all of the noise pollution out there. Don't read like all the main newspapers that only like to focus on the most selective schools. So,
Of course.
we try to get students to think of it that way.
Absolutely. I do have obviously a lot of questions and a lot more things to talk about. But real quick, I wanted to make sure to plug and promote your company, GemSite College and Career Planners. So anybody listening can go to gemsiteccp.com. They have a Facebook page, they have an X account, and I believe a YouTube page as well. So definitely dig in, find some information. Geri's contact information is there. I'll put a link in the show notes afterwards as well. So getting back to the complications and the application process and such, one thing that intrigued me last week when we were doing some college tours that both TCNJ and Drexel mentioned that SAT and ACT testing was optional. I remember like SATs was the norm when I went to high school in the 90s. And I think it's evolved multiple times over the years, right? Like when I went to high school and college, the max score was like 1600. And then at some point it went to 2400, and then it went back to 1600 again. And now I'm hearing that you don't even have to take those tests. Can you take me through the process in terms of like, do people really have to take the tests? Do schools look at it as a plus or a minus? Will it help you if you do it? Kind of like, what does that look like?
So I think going back to when you went through this,
Yes.
the SAT, which seemed to have been sort of more East Coast, West Coast.
Yes.
The Midwest was more inclined to be taking the ACT.
Okay.
They're both standardized tests. Years ago, the SAT was more aptitude and the ACT was more achievement. Over the years, that's become much more blurred, and both tests are more similar. And colleges are not partial to one test or the other. So we suggest to students that they take a diagnostic test or they take a practice ACT, SAT, see which test they seem to lean towards. And then that's the test they should focus on. You also don't test more than 3 times. We'll have students who think, oh, I can take it again and again and again.
Right.
3 times, walk away. In terms of the test optional movement, that really came pre-COVID.
Okay.
There were some liberal arts colleges that were test optional because they had really felt that one day of testing did not define who that student was. So there had been some colleges that were test optional for decades already. Then along comes COVID. And if you go back to the peak COVID, you couldn't even go to a school to take a standardized test. So because of all those restrictions, colleges were forced basically overnight to go test optional because kids could not get seats.
Got it.
So then that happened, and then some colleges, now they're all monitoring it and seeing, wait, do we really need them? Do we need to go back? And so as testing opened up, many colleges that were in fact test optional, most colleges have stayed test optional. So that means you can take your tests, you don't love your scores, you don't think that they're maybe make you as qualified as you'd like to be for a certain school, so you don't have to submit them. And maybe to another school, your scores are really pretty impressive, so maybe to that school, you would submit them. What is starting to happen, and last year there was a lot of headlines that a few colleges are starting to go back to requiring testing. They tend to be the more highly selective schools that have done that. So, will that move continue? My guess is yes. I think we will see some more schools start requiring them again. But to just go one step further, the schools that are test optional, if you're going to be totally transparent, and if you look at the students that submit high test scores versus the students that did not, could there be a slightly higher acceptance rate from the students that submitted scores?
Right.
And chances are yes, if you really break down the stats.
Makes sense. So it seems like, if I'm reading what you're saying correctly, for the most part, it's optional. However, if you do well enough on it, it'll probably give you the extra edge applying to that school versus if you did not submit the test.
Could it be the deciding factor? Colleges will say that they're reading holistically, they're
Of course.
looking at everything, they're looking at activity. The most important thing, and this I can't stress enough, it's the student's GPA and the rigor of courses that they take.
Got it.
So, and that's in the context of their school. Some schools have a lot of AP courses, other schools don't. A student will not be penalized for not taking AP courses if their school doesn't offer them. But so it's GPA, rigor of courses, and then let's throw in this testing.
Of course. What about the location of the school, right? Because some school districts, let's say, are notorious for being great school districts versus some, let's say, less than stellar. Do college admissions boards take that into consideration, or is it kind of like within that selection set? It basically says, okay, if you went to the school, how did you do in the school versus your peers?
That's what this gets down to. How did you perform in your school?
Got it.
If a student goes to the number, like a high school, a public high school in New Jersey,
Sure.
that's very well regarded, and a student performs average there, it doesn't matter that they went to that high school. They're going to be looking at that student's performance in that school.
Got it.
So if a student happens to go to a school that maybe isn't very well funded, and this student really has excelled, that student's going to stand out there.
Got it. So almost like the big fish in a small pond, that they do really well with everyone else around, I guess, the same or below, they'll stick out, to your point, and they'll probably have an advantage when they then apply to schools.
Absolutely.
Awesome. That's super helpful to know. Thank you for that. Let me ask you this, because I know, again, you work for a firm, again, GemSite College and Career Planners. My daughter's junior in high school. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there who have similar situations, junior in high school, senior in high school. What does a firm like yours offer? Like, if someone were to sign up with you and use you guys as consultants, like what does it look like?
So the very first thing we do is really get to know the student. Like, we want to learn about them. We need to know what their strengths are, what they're comfortable with, any situations that they might be dealing with. But really get to know them, and we'll go through, we have different assessments that we use, try to find out what's really important to them. Maybe, they need to be someplace where there's maybe they want to play a sport, but not Division One, if that's important. What major are they interested in? And then we start to send them out. We'll start to build a list, and the initial list is going to be very broad. They go visit schools like you did last week, and then come back and share what they liked and what felt really comfortable. What didn't? Maybe they loved everything about Drexel. However, they didn't like being in Philadelphia. Or maybe College of New Jersey, they liked everything there, but it felt too far away from a larger city. But so they'll come back and report in. Both everybody who's with us is always touring colleges. So let's just say you're in Jersey, you start looking at schools in New Jersey, but ultimately you might be interested in schools in California. So you start looking close by, you tell us what you liked, and then we can start recommending schools in other areas so that you're not first getting on planes flying all over.
Got
And
it.
then that's how we build the list. We also review activities to make sure we think that the extracurricular activities are as rich as they could be. We're monitoring grades, always encouraging students to work to their potential, whatever that is. And then we'll start brainstorming for essays. We go through completing the Common App, and we do this much earlier than many students might be inclined to do that. So going into the summer of senior year, their applications are basically done, their main personal statement is done, and then we're just waiting for colleges to release their supplemental questions, and then we take them straight through the process. There's also other things. We'll help them figure out who they should be asking for recommendations, help them prepare their resume, so that ultimately our students will read as well as they can read.
Awesome. Well, that's super helpful. I appreciate you sharing that because again, early in the process, and your position or your consulting firm for the most part, it didn't exist when I went to high school, or it was very far and few between. Like it wasn't really like a huge thing. But I assume now, with all the information and so many data points, it can get very confusing and intimidating. It definitely is super helpful. Questions that I have actually that you just kind of brought up there. So number one, from a recommendation perspective, like how early would you suggest students request letters of recommendation from whoever they do? Is it something they should do like early to mid junior year? I assume not last minute because people are probably getting bombarded with lots of requests, right?
I mean, typically we start discussing this spring of junior year.
Okay.
And then different schools might have different processes in place for asking teachers and the time and all. But definitely it should be done spring of junior year.
Got it. That's super helpful. Other question that actually did come in as well. So, does your firm help out with like college funding strategies? So, just speaking out of myself, like the day my kids each were born, we opened up a 529 fund to get money put aside so that way it grows tax free. Different people are in different income brackets, different demos, stuff like that. So, obviously, from like a financial aid perspective, there are different strategies, or so I've been told, that you could take to try to, let's say, more so qualify for financial aid. Um, does your firm or groups like yours help out in terms of saying, okay, here's your assets, here's your income, I don't know, estate planning kind of stuff, or is that something you guys don't really touch?
We don't do estate planning at all.
Okay.
We know every year we do run 3 webinars. One is an overview of the financial aid process. Then there's one which is completing the FAFSA, which is the federal financial aid form. It's completing the FAFSA line by line. And then there's another document, the CSS profile, which is through College Board, and many of the private universities require the CSS profile. So we do these 3 webinars for our clients, and then we can refer people if they're looking for more assistance in
Are,
that.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, we can refer people.
Do you offer those webinars? Like, is that part of like if somebody contracts with you, or are those free webinars that are open to the public?
Typically, if you contract with us, however, you can invite your friends and family. I mean, it's not like, we make them sign at the dotted line.
Got it. Understood. And I assume that the information about when those webinars would probably be either via your social media or your website, or you probably publish out that information.
Yeah, we, release that to our clients.
Awesome. From a FAFSA perspective, let me ask you this: like, how dominant is this? So, in my daughter's high school, I found out because a couple of weeks ago I went to like a financial aid seminar as they're getting junior students and their parents like kind of on board of what to expect. I don't know if it's all of New Jersey, but my specific school district, one of the things they have to do to graduate high school is they have to submit that FAFSA paperwork. Of what they explained it, I think it was to make sure that, let's say, people with lower income who maybe weren't aware they could get financial aid or would qualify for college would be able to. So, in order for her to graduate high school, regardless if she is qualified or not, she has to submit that paperwork. Is that something that happens kind of like nationwide? Is that like state by state, county by county? Like, how does that look usually?
It's actually pretty new in New Jersey.
Okay.
Um, I think it's actually a good thing that New Jersey is requiring that now. Like, we generally would encourage families to submit the FAFSA, even if they're not going to get money.
Okay.
There are a few schools that actually even require the FAFSA for what's called merit money. Merit money is not based on your finances, it's based on academic qualifications. And there are some schools that require that. But the thing also, once the FAFSA is filed, in case something changes, somebody loses a job, there's, some unforeseen catastrophic event,
Of
a
course.
college can respond quicker to a student if the FAFSA has already been filed.
Got it. Super helpful. Yeah, appreciate that. Actually, another question came into getting back to the recommendations. So, when students do ask for recommendations from teachers, coaches, whatever else they do they generally go in and say, "Here's some bullet points about me"? Do they kind of say like open ended, like, "Hey, write a recommendation about me"? Like, what does that kind of a conversation look like usually between like the students and whoever they're asking? So
They,
it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
if they can write a favorable recommendation,
Yes.
and if the teacher says no, I tell the student they should really thank that teacher
Right.
because that teacher just gave them a gift. So you want to ask a teacher. Now, some teachers might have a form that they want you to complete,
Okay.
or
So Jerry appears to be having some Wi-Fi issues as she's coming and going. So I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the process until Jerry comes back on. Are you there, Jerry? It seems like you dropped out there for a second. Are you okay?
I'm here. It looks like I should be fine network wise, but
Okay. Okay, so it looks like Jerry's computer or her Wi-Fi is frozen again. So what Jerry was mentioning was it seems like some teachers might have kind of almost like a form request that you can kind of give to the teacher or whoever, basically stating like, "Hey, my name is so and so. I'm looking for a letter of recommendation. Here's what I'm looking for." And what Jerry was mentioning was that if a teacher, let's say, either refuses to give a letter of recommendation or it's less than stellar, obviously you don't want to provide that, right? You want to make sure that you're putting your best self out to colleges when you do apply and share out your recommendations.
so the thing is, you do not get to read this recommendation.
Oh, it goes directly to the school, so it's kind of a blind reco.
It is actually students need to sign off
Okay.
for submitting their common application,
Right.
if they understand that they will not be reading their recommendations.
Oh, wow. So they need to make sure they're super, super sure that the person who they're asking for a
That's
reco from is going to take care of them, because they're not going to see it before it gets submitted.
so that's why, I think when I had my little technical glitch there. So if they ask the teacher if they can write a favorable recommendation, and if the teacher says, I think it might be better if you ask somebody else,
Right.
that's great.
Of
The
course.
student should thank that teacher. We've had that happen a few times, and but students want to ask teachers where they're actively engaged in that class, where they've worked really hard.
Yep. Absolutely. Another question that came in from a Marcus Perkal. He told me he wanted to ask. He says he's discussed with you many times, but he thinks this is something that's worthwhile putting out there. So he says, obviously, the college process is stressful for all parties involved, students and parents, and in some cases, it's possibly the most stressful time in the student's life to date. What is the single most important piece of advice you can share to prospective college students in this process, and the single most important piece of advice to parents?
So to the parents, they need to let the student drive the process. The parents have already gone to college, and this is now your student's chance.
Right.
So for the parent, I really think they need to support the student. And and the student is applying to college. So the student needs to be engaged.
Right. Um, so, from a student, would you say the most important piece of advice for the student is to be engaged, or is there anything else that you would share that you think is the number one thing for the prospective college student?
Um, they really need to be active in this. They need to go out. They need to look at schools. They need to see what really feels comfortable for them, and talk about that, be open. I mean, we really want students, and we always say that, like, we're guiding, advising, the students are applying, and the parents are supporting. And so that's sort of everybody's role in this process.
Got it. Super helpful. Again, it sounds like Marcus and you have had this conversation multiple times before. He tried to set me up with an easy softball there, so there was that question. No,
Well, just the end of that story, seriously,
of
was
course.
that I wanted one of my kids to go to a different school than they wanted to go to.
Right.
And I really have felt pretty strongly about this. And I really had to back off and say, I'm not going to college. If I, and you need to let the student drive it unless there's something that a parent really saw that was, really, disturbing. But
Right.
the student needs to drive this.
Makes sense. I appreciate that. That's super helpful. Question that came in. Actually, this is a two-part question. I'm not sure they're related to each other. One of them is post COVID, do you feel schools have loosened up their acceptance too much?
Not at all.
Okay. So you think it's I guess relatively similar to before. It's just different in terms of how it
Yeah.
is. But for those part, acceptance rates are roughly the same. Might be a slightly different process, but for the most part, chances aren't different if you applied before versus after COVID.
Well, what happened after COVID was colleges became more selective
Okay.
because once scores became optional, then there was this artificial bump up in applications because, oh, I could never have applied there. My scores weren't good enough.
Right.
Oh, but now I can apply there. So with that, automatically colleges became more selective.
Makes total sense. I get it. I mean, not everybody's good at test taking. So, to your point, if that variable goes away and it's the only thing that I'm not good at, in theory, that could give me an edge versus where I was previously. It makes total sense. Um, in terms of your company services or similar company services, do you think that there's a true benefit to using your services for everybody, or are there certain types of students or certain types of families that benefit more versus less using you guys?
So people can absolutely get through this process without hiring an independent educational consultant. And some schools, guidance departments are really actively there and supporting the students. Can an independent educational consultant help a student explore, figure out the right fit, help the student, um, give the student more time in essay development, be there every step of the way? Absolutely. So you can absolutely do this without, we're called, the profession as IECs, independent educational consultants. We serve a tremendous service
Of
for
course.
families that do utilize, our services.
Makes total sense. I almost see it as, I pay for a landscaper. I pay someone to mow my lawn. I pay someone to do services in my house, clean my house. I could mow my own lawn. I could do these types of things, but will I do it as well as somebody else? Will I get a benefit from using a service? Absolutely. I get, the power of time I get back. I get a better look at the end of the day. I could spend more time doing other things. So completely see it, right? And the fact that you guys are the pros. You do this every day, you do this all the time. If I try it, I have one opportunity with my kid, and if I make a mistake that I don't get consulting on, I may look back and say she could have gone into a school if I'd done something differently. Going to experts like yourself definitely helps out in terms of the process and making me feel as a parent that like I've done everything that I can to try to help my kid, get the best opportunity she can get.
I definitely, I think the comparison possibly, you can do your own taxes.
Of course.
And if you employ somebody who's an accountant, a CPA, they're going to know certain things that you're not going to know.
Better analogy. Absolutely. Totally get that one. I see
You
it.
know, But
100%.
I do think, another plus to employing somebody is not every kid sort of respects their parents' opinion. There could be extra stress and tension, and often, like, we remove or we reduce that stress, that friction. Um, and we do encourage our students to still, their parents do know some things that maybe they don't credit them with knowing. So,
Makes total sense, right? Because it's, I mean, looking back too, it's the same thing with like when my wife was a soccer coach. Like eventually she looked at it, she was a soccer coach for one of my daughters, but she didn't, it's weird coaching your kid because then when you have to coach them, they may or may not listen, things like that. Here again, like if I tell my kid like, hey, this is the right way to go to school or right things to do, she may not listen, but looking at you as, an interested third party who's got her best interests in mind that she doesn't live with every day, she may trust your perspective more on certain things. I mean, it's just human nature, right? Especially as a teenager, we're all, we all grow up and we're rebelling against our parents. Is kind of how it is, right?
I think also the other thing is, like, we know what's happening at these colleges. They change a policy.
Of course.
That's our job to know what they're doing. They're changing their essays. We need to be staying on top of that. We visit colleges, 25 colleges a year. We find out like new majors. We find out, different things. So we're sort of at the forefront of what's going on.
Of course. Question for you. So obviously, again, you guys are Gem Site College and Career Planners. Your website shows that you're out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Do you guys offer your services nationwide and do most of your services via Zoom, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So again, with COVID, that changed totally. So my partner is based out of Philly in Arizona. I had been based out of New Jersey. We had, years ago, we only met in person. So along came COVID, we went virtual. And what we found was when that relaxed, the students were like, no, no, this works fine. They can come in from school, they get on Zoom,
Right.
they're done. And at that time also, we started really going nationwide. So we have students, at, I would say probably in 20 states.
Oh
I'm
wow.
just throwing that out, but it's give or take. And everything is Zoom. We probably, We have a comprehensive package. We work with students. Most students start in 11th grade. We definitely have started now. We have more students in 10th grade, and we do have some students in 9th. But 10th, 11th is really the best time to be, really planning rather than reacting.
Awesome, super helpful. And from a compensation perspective, do yours and similar consultant services, is it like a one cost package? Is it a per hour? Kind of like how does that generally structure, or does it vary, client by client?
We work with comprehensive package. We really don't do much hourly work. There are some independents who are straight hourly and don't do comprehensive packages, but our comprehensive package um, is one price for 11th and 12th, and it's a slightly higher price starting in 9th or 10th.
Okay.
And it takes you basically through the process. We do limit the number of applications because we don't want to encourage students to be applying to 20, 25, something crazy.
Right.
We sort of think 12 is like a good number,
Okay.
and that's what we'd like to support.
Got it.
But, if students want to do some, additional, then we will charge.
Got it. Awesome. This has been fantastic, Jerry. Again, I really, really appreciate your time. Once again, to remind everybody, you can find Geri Perkal at GemSite College and Career Planners. The website is, and let me bring that back up again so that way I can make sure to give it properly. The website is over at gemsiteccp.com. They're also available on various social media platforms. Jerry, anything else that you want to promote or talk about before we end for the week?
No, GemSite, though, is GEMSIGHT. We sort of thought we made it a real word, but it's not. So I just want to spell that out. But
Of
because
course.
our students are gems, and then we sort of had the foresight. So
That's good. That's good. Really, I mean, that's pretty smart. Really appreciate that. And again, we'll put the website and some of the links as well in the show notes so anybody can find it and kind of link to you as well. So with that said, again, Jerry, thank you so much for joining. For those of you that did join and listen to the podcast, thank you. As always, really means a lot to us that you continue to listen to us on a weekly basis. Remind your friends you could find us at Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, Good Pods, Pandora, and lots of other places. Once again, our Instagram is at Everybody Has a Story Pod. DMs are open, so if you want to be a guest or have any questions, feel free to reach out through that. My personal Insta is Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. Check me out at jeffseltzer.com. And once again, you can email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining. Again, we'll be back next week with probably another guest. I don't think I'm going solo. Probably the guest next week. We'll see how that goes. And outside of that, have a great week, and we'll talk soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
thank you.